This is my still life setup. I'm using a directional light source to illuminate my still life. I will be painting on gesso board, and the size is 12 by 16. I cut my sketch paper about the same size as my gesso board. Whenever I paint, I'm facing my still life, so I turn myself and I'm facing it straight down, and then I begin sketch. I normally start with the largest shape, and then I'm making a circle, and then I place other elements right next to my biggest shape. To make it look right, it's important to give it a direction. So as you can see, I have the directional lines placed over here, and then I just mark where it's supposed to end, and then I would make straight lines like this following the directional line. It gives me the right position of the shell. I can still refine this where I see it's perfect. Okay, and then the last thing that I'm doing, I'm just placing the shadow that I see. Whenever I need to fix shapes, I'm using HB graphite pencil, and I need an eraser. So it doesn't leave any residue when you start erasing, and it doesn't tear up your paper if you're doing a refined drawing. I always draw through the shapes to make sure they connect. I copy the direction of every part of the object, like in the starfish. Every leg has its own unique direction. When I draw symmetrical shapes, I use my folding method technique, meaning that I draw the entire vase and then I fold it right in the center and redraw the second part of the vase, so both sides of the vase match perfectly. To transfer my images, I use transfer paper and HB graphite pencil. I put my transfer paper over the panel and then I begin transferring the image. I often use masking tape and a heavy object to keep my drawing in place while I'm doing the transferal. Underpainting can be done in many ways. I'm showing one of the most popular ways of completing the underpainting. First, I begin painting in warm brown. You know, brands differ, but you basically pick a warm brown such as burnt sienna. I begin painting by focusing on the darks or the shadows. The idea is to establish a warm undertone for my painting. I also keep it quite transparent and I vary the thickness of my paint depending on the area where I'm painting. If I see that some areas need to be darker, I use thicker paint, and let's say if I paint glass, I try to keep it transparent. At this step, I never use linseed oil because I follow fat over lean rule. That means that there is no medium used in the first layers, and then as you keep building up your painting, you start adding linseed oil to your paint. So to dilute this paint, I use a little bit of Gamsol that makes the paint look more transparent and fluid. I pre-mix a string of colors going from purest black to
the purest white. It creates a range of tones that I'm going to use in my painting. First, I mix ivory black with just a little bit of brown to warm it up, and then I keep adding a touch of white to create a different shade. That's how I end up with a range of tones. Black and white underpainting is the old master's technique. Black and white underpainting establishes correct value scale, and once this underpainting is totally dry, you can layer colors on top of black and white painting. And so I'm often asked, why bother painting in black and white if you could just skip it and paint in full color immediately? It is possible, it's another type of painting, but when you just begin learning to see values as opposed to colors and to develop shapes correctly, this is the method you need to learn. Also, it depends on the technique, but a lot of times when we do glazing, it's much easier to make a complete underpainting in one color and then begin glazing top of that. I'm gonna show you this technique in the end of this video. So I apply paint by following the shadows and the darks first. If it gets too heavy, I use my paper towel to wipe off some of the paint to keep it more transparent and light. I begin layering different shades of gray depending on the values that I see in my still life. For instance, the bottom part of the vase is very dark, and that's my reasoning for using much darker gray paint as opposed to the side of the vase, which is much lighter, and so I'm using a lighter mix of gray paint. When I apply gray paint over this brownish layer, it has brownish undertone, and so this gray paint looks very bluish or even greenish depending on the light. It's all an illusion. I keep filling in the vase, and when I switch to a much darker or much lighter paint, I try to soften the edge because glass is soft, it's elusive. Reflections change as we move looking at glass, and that's why edges must be very nice and soft to create that illusion. I also use a very nice clean and soft brush to soften the edges along the way. I carefully observe the abstract shapes that I see in the vase, and I try to simplify them and focus on the tone of every shape, painting it. As I begin painting the starfish, once again I focus on the shadows first and mark those shadows with the same paint. And I mix grays, thinking of my tones of values that I see in the shadow part of the starfish. As you can see, I'm not sloppy and I'm using quite a small brush to fill in the shadows carefully. Once I get to a lighter part of the seashell, I clean up my brush and charge it with lighter color and begin painting there. As you can see, I begin creating volume, painting in black and white. The more precise I get, the more volume the starfish is going to have. Basically, I rely on my practice and observation skills to mix the correct value for every section of the starfish. I begin filling in the background at the same time as I keep painting everything else. Values in the background affect what I see in the foreground. It also affects the edges. That's why I keep painting everything at the same time. I rotate my panel a lot to apply paint using the correct type of stroke. Placing the strokes in the right direction is very important to create a volume. I want my background to have a different kind of stroke, not to confuse it with the objects themselves. When I paint the shadow on the wall behind the vase, I attempt to make the edge much softer than I'm going to have in the vase itself. That's how I'm trying to create the difference between the shadow and the object itself. When you paint the shadows or the cast shadows that you see under the objects, they need to have a much softer edge as opposed to the object itself. A lot of times it's just much easier to paint and to place the right stroke and make the edge nice and even by rotating the panel. And once again, if you aim to become better painting realistically, you shouldn't be sloppy. You should really try copying everything that you see by observing values and applying, keeping your drawing perfect and applying strokes in the right direction to capture volume of every object. As I keep painting the top part of the vase, I'm thinking about symmetry, and I'm trying to be as perfect as possible, painting the rim of the blue vase. I also begin filling in smaller shapes found within a larger shape. And I blend the edges, the transitions between those values. Always remember to continue painting on dry surface. That means that every layer that you put, it needs to dry out completely. It's important for several reasons. One of them is archival, because your painting could crack over time if you don't follow this rule. Another thing is, when you use glazing technique, it's super important to have a dry layer, so when you start glazing color on top of that, the previous layer is not going to move. I keep painting smaller abstract shapes found within the vase using my small brush, and when I want to blend the edge, I use a different kind, a different brush which is clean and soft. Okay, I'm getting to the next layer of grisaille painting. I'm gonna focus on painting textures and details. I begin painting parts of seaweed, the branches that you see here. I'm using a small round brush, but today I find that it looks crude. I think a small liner brush does a much better job painting such details. I don't paint every single branch. I just focus on major branches and layout because I'm gonna repaint that at a later stage. I just want to have them as a guide, and also I want to have that a reflection in the vase. I begin painting small highlights and reflections in the vase. I try to capture the correct shape of every reflection. Since this is my second gray underpainting, I have all my shadows being established in my previous layer, and now I focus on the lightest areas. So the logic is to establish the shadows first, and now I look at my highlights or the lightest areas, and then I would be finding a range of tones found in between those two poles of light and dark. So here you see me painting the lightest areas in the starfish, and I'm using particular strokes to describe texture of the starfish. I keep looking at the rotation of every leg in the starfish because it changes direction of my strokes. I want to describe the texture on every leg, and it differs slightly, and also every leg has a different lighting. That's what I'm thinking about as I keep painting. I keep layering texture right next to the previously applied paint. It because it's much easier to mix the right value by tiling the paint, meaning that I start in one area and I continue painting right next to that area. For instance, I started with the lightest paint and then the leg turns into the shadow, and that tells me that I need to mix darker paint to describe that. I look at the center of the starfish and study it carefully to understand the pattern, and I try to copy all those lines that I see right in the middle of the starfish. As you can see, it already gets quite detailed, and this kind of painting could be a finished product at this point if I just wanted to finish it painting in black and white. You know, in the 19th century, artists did a very refined black and white painting to glaze colors on top of that. Now I begin refining all the shapes that I see inside the vase. Also, I'm constantly thinking about the roundness of the vase, and I keep curving my shapes even more than I think that I need to create volume. I keep touching up different parts of the vase, making some edges darker, painting softly to create the difference between the values. Here you see me painting the texture of the table. I use up and down uneven stroke. Just keep watching how I try to imitate this texture. Also, I soften some of the edges and I keep changing the values slightly to create uneven stripes that resemble this texture. I add strong highlights and in the reflections inside of the vase. I darken the areas around the highlights to make them pop even more. And I start painting the reflected starfish in the vase. As you can see, the values are darker than the starfish. That's how I create contrast, because the vase is a lot darker than the starfish, but the reflection itself is slightly lighter than the general tone of the blue vase. And I keep refining the values around the branches inside of the vase. Now the vase looks much darker, and it also has a range of tones, and it has many beautiful reflections. And it's still black and white, it's not even colored yet. I refine the shadow behind the vase the same way, focusing on values. So if I see that something is darker, like the rim, I add some color there. Now we are getting to painting in full color and glazing. Fun! To glaze colors means to use very transparent oil paint with lots of medium. You can use linseed oil. Here I'm just using a variation, or, a different medium to achieve the same result. To apply this technique, you must have your painting dry completely before you could start glazing. Otherwise, you'll be moving this black and white paint and mixing it into the color layer. Glazing can be done in several layers. It doesn't have to be done in just one layer. But remember, as you keep glazing a particular area, it gets darker and darker with every new glaze. So you have to plan ahead and think how light or dark you want to have your objects being painted. I mix a variation of blue paint for different parts of the vase, depending on its light and transparency. And I'm super careful painting in color close to the edge. It needs to fill it in completely, but it really shouldn't touch the background. And this is what I'm doing here. If I get my paint somewhere I don't want to have, I use my color shaper to lift it out. I glaze the paint in the shadow area as well, and as you can see it darkens everything substantially. That's why I'm saying you have to try it out and plan ahead. You know, you have to paint in black and white somewhat lighter, because you know that when you start glazing colors it's gonna look much darker in the end. I glaze the colors in the table the same way, and I lift out extra paint using my paper towel. You've got to use blue paper towels to lift out the paint, because you know, cheap paper towels could leave a lot of stuff on your panel. As you can see, I keep glazing the paint very thinly, because I'm going to let it dry and use the second layer to build up the color. So if you ask why not just painting thicker in one layer as opposed to glazing paint in several layers, and the answer is very simple. You create this illusion and the depth that we see in beautiful paintings by glazing colors in progression. I fill in the lighter areas in the shadow by mixing opaque paint. Whenever you add white, it becomes opaque anyways, and that's how I'm filling in those light turquoise reflections that we see in the background. I use my underpainting as a guide to paint over it, painting the branches once again. But I try to be more precise and make lines uneven and soft and curvy all at the same time. Once the paint settles just a little bit, I use a clean soft brush and a very light touch to soften the edges. I add the second layer, glazing the colors and basically repeating the process, painting the vase. And once again, the previous layer must be dry to do that. Once I'm done glazing and I think it looks transparent and the color is rich, sometimes the highlights get murky, and basically I re-establish the highlights on top of my previously applied highlights, and I just make them brighter where I see I lost them. I switched to painting the starfish, and what I need to do is I need to color it, and I repeat my black and white process, but I add a little bit of color. It's not just about repainting everything. Basically, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to refine it even more, to find even more detail, my understanding of lighting and texture. So it's not about just simple repainting or going through the same steps. It's more about the refining and finding subtle differences in texture and light. As you can see, I keep rotating my brush to make strokes in the right direction, painting texture on every leg of the starfish. And unlike in everything else, starfish has sharper edges because it's light, and it has a lot of texture, and so it looks much sharper in comparison to everything else. If you look at the reflection under the starfish, it's a lot softer, and that's what creates the illusion. You paint the objects in sharper focus, but keep other edges very nice and soft and not as bright in comparison to your focal point. Don't forget to varnish your painting in half a year after the painting is done. It takes a lot longer for oil paint to settle, even if it's dry to the touch. Use professional spray varnish to varnish everything. It's going to bring out the colors even more and make it nice and even and beautiful. And here's the final painting. It's done. This step completes this demonstration.